We like each other so much, even after doing an hour show on Tuesday, a post-game show last night following their loss to the Suns. We decided, hey, Joel Embiid gets suspended. Let's emergency pod it as well. Welcome to the PHLY Sixers podcast. This emergency
Sick
pod
of you damn people. Get them out of my face.
By Indeed. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/AllCity. That's Indeed.com/AllCity. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, fellas, Kyle, it drops. As soon as we decided to step away and maybe look at some other television going on there, the NBA announces that they have suspended Joel Embiid for 3 games following his locker room incident from over the weekend. 3 games is what it is. We all collectively decided that 3 games would probably be the punishment for Joel Embiid, and that's exactly what it is. Are you surprised at all by this amount of games?
No, I mean, I think maybe if I was really splitting hairs or parsing this, I would have said 2 games, and that's where they settle on. But ultimately, it was somewhere in the 2 to 5 range is where I was expecting. I want, for anybody who is seeing this and has not seen the NBA's release on this, Joe Dumars, who's the EVP, head of basketball operations for the NBA, put out a statement and said, here's the direct quote from Joe Dumars. Mutual respect is paramount to the relationship between players and media in the NBA. While we understand Joel was offended by the personal nature of the original version of the reporter's column, interactions must remain professional on both sides and can never turn physical. So I think it's very clear here that had this just been a locker room argument with a bunch of yelling and screaming and F-bombs and don't talk about my family, that everyone probably would have moved on with their lives, that the NBA drew this line because of the physical nature of it. I think if I were to offer some commentary or critique here, I think the statement is basically a tacit admission that the conduct and the writing of said reporter and columnist was also not professional. And I think it's a little tough to say there's no blowback from that. No, not to say that, there will be people who are like, ban Marcus Hayes from the locker room forever. And that's certainly not a road they're going to go down, or that I think they should go down. But I think it's a little inconsistent you basically have to admit to make this statement that he was in the wrong, right? Because they do have to include in the column, he had to remove this from the article. Like it crossed lines enough with not just Joel, with the public, that they had to retract something that they wrote, right? Normally that'd be something you do if it was a factually incorrect thing that was printed, right? Where you'd offer some type of retraction notice and edit. The fact that they have to include that sort of gives up the game that, yeah, this was a problem on their end too. And I'm not sure how you square that, especially when the Inquirer's position has been resolute, where they've offered unequivocal and unflinching support of Marcus, which you want from an employer, but also
you maybe want publicly from an employer, which I'll get to in a second, I guess.
Yeah, but also there probably does have to be some discussion of the standards over there and allowing something like that to get to print in the first place. So it's a very complicated issue, especially on our end, where we have to navigate we want to preserve the rights of the press and all that, while also acknowledging there were several lines crossed by what happened here.
Yeah. So a couple things. First of all, props on the Sixers for leaking to Sam Amick that Joel might play tomorrow, because now there's no pushback when you start that clock there. Good job, professional operation in that regard. I thought obviously the immediate impact for Sixers fans is Joel Embiid will not be available for 3 games. Obviously, big deal. We've been talking about his absence. We just had a podcast literally within the last hour about how he will change them when he gets back. That is delayed a little bit. That's a shame. The other main takeaway I had coming from this article was that Joe Dumars was quoted as saying, or not Joe Dumars, but actually, where was it? They mentioned shove at some point in this press release. It wasn't Joe Dumars quoting, but it was in the first line of the press release that he has been, suspended 3 games without pay for shoving a member of the media. There has been a lot of discussion of whether he was struck and shoved, which has been the Inquirer's position here. Obviously, the NBA did not find that. Otherwise, they would have included that in the report. And I have a feeling that the suspension would have been for more than 3 games. So I think there has been an ongoing debate over whether or not that was part of the altercation. This is at the very least some evidence that there is, or at least that there is no evidence that he was struck. And I'm going to reiterate a little bit of what Kyle did. Look, it is the NBA's job to police their own employees. And Dumars did that here. It is not Dumars' job to police employees of the Philadelphia Inquirer. That being said, I hope whoever is in charge of that is doing a little bit of soul searching, because the mutual respect part was certainly not there for Marcus in the original column. There was an oversight in terms of how that column was presented, an editorial oversight that was missed, that this would obviously inflame tensions and be gratuitous and unnecessary. And then there was the reporting of it being a punch from that had to be retracted almost immediately. And I do hope there is a little bit of soul searching, not necessarily because I want to defend a reporter getting shoved, but because as somebody whose job it is to report on the team, I care very much about, relationships between the reporter side and the team side and the player side. That access is important to what we do. There's other sports where that is being debated. We don't need these kind of black marks on our profession. And it was just a little bit unprofessional the way that the Inquirer handled it. So I do hope there is some internal soul searching, because our jobs, first of all, I'm, passionate about our jobs, but also it's just a bad look. So I do really, really hope that there's some soul searching going on there as well. Even if it doesn't come out in public, even if just internally, they need to do better.
Yeah. And to that point, Derek, you would have been there on a normal night, right? And we were.
Thanks, Rich.
I was having discussions with you specifically from the locker room where I was like, "Hey, look, something is going on here that is going to mess up or change what post-game media looks like," right? And I didn't get fully into it with you. And as there are reports leaking out about this, I'm telling you, like, look, when we do our post-game show and I talk to you, I will give the full picture, because in this scenario where there's a lack of information, there's only so many people who are actually in that room. You can't tweet and you can't post and you can't go on TV and YouTube and wherever else half thoughts and half truths and half versions of a story, because then people, as we've talked about with the Joel Embiid injury situation, people fill in their own information. People make their own narratives, and it turns into an entirely different thing. I think it seems like, based on the punishment, based on the statement, everything else, that the league ultimately did a thorough enough job to figure out what was and what wasn't accurate. And I think that's all that matters here in terms of, the relative quote unquote fairness of what they handed down.
So the mutual respect part for me was the first thing that jumped out to me, that really got to me of, okay, not just because I read it, but also because of the simple fact that everything that we know from the weekend, and Kyle, you're reporting, the video, the conversation that we had with you post game, but then people immediately saying, okay, if Joel is going to get suspended, which he did today, and then now this dropping, then what happens to Marcus Hayes too? Because as we said in our show about over an hour ago, that there were some people on Joel's side, and then we discussed it on our show as well, about how we didn't really expect all the wave of support that Joel Embiid did get for people outside of the city who don't have an opinion about Marcus Hayes, but did read the story, the initial story, and understanding and what was in there. So the mutual respect part is there. All right, if Joel Embiid is suspended for 3 games, that's the NBA. That's what they're going to do. Now, what will the Inquirer do when it comes to Marcus Hayes in this regard? And as you guys said, we may not know, it may be something that remains behind closed doors and all, but the mutual respect part is there. And they made it very clear that just as the player is supposed to hold himself accountable and hold himself back and not reacting, even though it was something that maybe could have been reacted to or should have been reacted to, you just don't do it. And it also goes to the same with the writer writing the piece that he did and inserting the thing about the family in there with this whole thing. So not a big surprise with the 3 games. If it had been more, then that's why I would have had a question. All right, what are we doing here? It shouldn't have been more than 3 games. Kyle, you said 3 to 5. All right, great. But if it was really more for me past 3, then that's why I would have really had a question of why is he at 4 and 5 that he's not going to be playing if he's available to play? Why is it so long? So they got it done. They got it out of the way. See you on the 12th, Joel, maybe, because now this starts the clock, as Derek pointed out, of leaking that he would maybe potentially be getting prepared for the Clippers game on Wednesday. So with the Clippers on Wednesday, Lakers Friday, Charlotte back in Philadelphia on Sunday, the New York Knicks game against the Sixers will be in Philadelphia, and that begins their NBA Cup schedule, by the way, on Tuesday, next Tuesday, a week from today.
In-season tournament. That's all that matters.
That's what
everybody
matters.
gets Joel back for the in-season tournament. That is
nationally televised game, by the way. Nationally televised game to have George and Embiid out there with Tyrese Maxey and the rest of the game.
So, yeah, there it is. And look, like, again, I have said all throughout this process that I understand Joel. I also don't
100%.
think he should be in a position where he's doing this, right? Like, he's still the reason he was punished is because he crossed the line. I compared it to in the article I wrote about the whole situation. When you see guys get thrown out of games for retaliating to something that somebody else did, just because you or the three of us could sit there and say, well, he was just reacting to something that this player did to him or a teammate, and you can justify it in that way. It still means he reacted and he did something to get thrown out of the game and put himself and his team in jeopardy by not being able to draw the line and stop at a point where you would say it's reasonable to stop. So all of this being said, like, I don't want to say support Joel, but I understand Joel taking a stand for his family and, giving Marcus an earful and saying, like, this is the line. This is where it stops. You want to be an agitator and do your thing. That's fine. But once you put your hands on somebody, the league was going to intervene. I think ultimately it's a relatively fair punishment and suspension. And now the onus is on Joel to come back on Tuesday, that Knicks game. And from there, it needs to be an ass-kicking tour because you are now staring down potentially a 1-8 type start for this team. They are going to have to dig out of a hole here. Maybe you get fortunate to end this road trip in LA and get some wins with Paul George, but that's how you show that you've learned something. You got to come back ready to kick people's asses on the floor.
Yep. And just echoing what Kyle said, like, in no way is that excusing Embiid. Clearly I think a push is different than like a shove that would have knocked Marcus on the ground, which is different than a punch. And I think the penalty should escalate, accordingly. We said, and literally earlier today, like an hour and a half ago, that unless they found something where it was more than just a light push, that 1 to 3 games is kind of what we were expecting. So like 5 or more than 5, I would have been stunned and I would have thought it was too harsh. No penalty, I would have been stunned and probably said that sets a bad precedent. 3 games is sort of right in the middle. That seems fair. But, I do hope that this is something where we can eventually move on from. I hope that this gives Joel a chance to get back because they are starting to put themselves behind the 8 ball. And I do hope that, Marcus and the Inquirer do a little self-introspection because I know that so much of the game today, in terms of being a journalist and a reporter, is getting attention. This is probably getting the Inquirer more national attention in terms of sports than they've gotten in a long time. I hope they're not looking at that as a positive because I do think we as a profession need to be a little better. And that means not running out to report something that we're not sure of, especially when it's as damaging as Joel Embiid throwing a punch allegedly without knowing is. And also that like our job shouldn't be to just be nasty unnecessarily and in a familiar way about your family to the people that we cover. I do think that there is professionalism on both sides that needs to improve.
All right, we got a super chat from Brian Pumper here on an emergency podcast. Embiid has been unhinged since he got the gold medal, holds one-on-one interview to say he won't play back-to-backs, blasts Philadelphia, and fades Marcus Hayes. When did he blast Philadelphia?
Hold on.
Well, you went 0 for 3 on those.
How is saying he's not, first of all, holding a one-on-one interview, like, Tim Bontemps of ESPN requested that interview. That's like, you're telling me that it's bad that he's speaking to journalists? And that was like the same day, I think, that he spoke to the entire group down at training camp. So I don't see where the problem is there. How is a team's approach of not playing in back-to-backs, how is that being unhinged? That's what like almost literally everyone is calling for. He didn't blast Philadelphia. Like that rant when he was saying, I've done too much for that. That was specifically about Marcus. I don't.
Did not.
Yeah, let's be very clear about what happened here. Joel made a forceful statement on Friday because of the same guy that he got into a verbal altercation with on Saturday. It was not a, oh my God, like boo-hoo, Philadelphia has treated me poorly. It's this guy came at my family to try to make some belabored point about my availability to play basketball. That's all that was about. And if you don't think that, go back and re-listen to it.
Yeah, so Pump, 0 for 3 on that one, as Derek said, because that's not the case for any of that. All right, that'll do it for us. We'll be back tomorrow for the pregame show. Once again, ahead of the Sixers and Clippers game. We'll see what the Sixers look like then, but we'll preview the game for you. This emergency pod here was brought to you by Indeed. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/AllCity. That's Indeed.com/AllCity. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. All right, that'll do it for us. We appreciate it. For Kyle, Derek, and Bree, I'm Devon. We'll talk to you tomorrow ahead of Sixers Clippers right here on the PHLY Sixers podcast.
We all silly like the mayor.